Some crimes don't just end in tragedy, they unravel with turns no one could imagine. Behind closed doors and quiet neighborhoods, lives collapse in ways more chilling than fiction. These are the stories where fate turned cruel, and every new revelation pulled the world deeper into shock and horror. It all began like a mystery straight out of a crime thriller. On May 24th, 2019, a wealthy mother of 5, Jennifer Dulos, suddenly disappeared after dropping her kids at school. For hours, no one knew where she had gone. Friends grew anxious when she failed to show up for scheduled appointments, and by evening, the alarm bells rang louder. Police were called, and the search began immediately. At first, it looked like a missing persons case, but soon, investigators realized that this was no ordinary disappearance. It was the beginning of one of the darkest and most shocking true crime stories of the decade. As days passed, detectives uncovered troubling evidence. In her garage, they found bloodstains and clear signs of a violent struggle. It became increasingly hard to believe that Jennifer had simply walked away from her life. Within weeks, the case shifted from a search for a missing woman to a full-blown homicide investigation. But there was still one major problem. Jennifer's body was nowhere to be found. Then came the first twist. Surveillance footage revealed a man driving a pickup truck late at night, making multiple stops to dump garbage bags in different locations. When those bags were recovered, they contained bloody clothing, sponges, and cleaning supplies. DNA tests confirmed that the blood belonged to Jennifer. The man driving the truck was identified as none other than her estranged husband, Fotis Dulos. The shocking part was how Fotis had managed to maintain a facade for so long. To the public, he appeared calm and even gave interviews proclaiming his innocence. He said he had nothing to do with his wife's disappearance and that he loved his children. But behind the mask of confidence, a darker truth was beginning to surface. Investigators dug deeper and found that Jennifer had filed for divorce 2 years earlier, citing fears for her safety. She claimed Fotis was controlling and had threatened her in the past. Their custody battle was bitter and ongoing, with Fotis fighting desperately to maintain control. To many, it became clear that Jennifer's vanishing was not random at all. It was the ultimate act of domestic violence. Another chilling twist came when Fotis's girlfriend, Michelle Traconis, was accused of helping him cover up the crime. She allegedly rode with him in the truck and assisted in disposing of evidence. Even more disturbing, police later discovered that Fotis had borrowed his employee's truck on the very day Jennifer disappeared, trying to disguise his movements. But perhaps the darkest turn was yet to come. In January 2020, as Fotis was awaiting trial for murder, he attempted to take his own life. He left behind a note proclaiming his innocence, insisting he had nothing to do with Jennifer's death. Days later, he died in the hospital, never facing a jury. With his death, many answers died with him. Jennifer's body has never been found, and her family continues to live with the pain of not having closure. The case of Jennifer Dulos remains one of the most haunting examples of how love, trust, and family life can hide unimaginable darkness. A woman vanished, her blood told the story of her final moments, and the man who once vowed to protect her became the prime suspect in her death. It's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not strangers in the night, but those closest to us. But Jennifer's case is just one glimpse into the haunting world of dark crime. If you thought this was disturbing, wait until you hear about a father who did the unthinkable to his own family, leaving the world horrified in ways no one could have imagined. It was a cold November night in Moscow, Idaho. On November 13th, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Gonkovs, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were brutally killed inside their off-campus house. The victims were young, full of life, and known for their bright futures. That morning, the quiet college town woke up to a nightmare that would send shockwaves across the nation. At first, details were scarce. The house showed no signs of forced entry. Two other roommates, sleeping in different parts of the home, were left unharmed. The killings were brutal, carried out with a knife in the middle of the night while the victims slept or fought for their lives. Fear spread quickly across campus. Students stopped attending classes, many returned home, and the community demanded answers. But the biggest question remained: who could do something so horrific? For weeks, investigators seemed to be chasing shadows. The police department released very little information, fueling rumors and speculation online. Thousands of internet sleuths tried to piece together clues, but the case remained unsolved. The small town was gripped by fear, unsure if a killer was still lurking among them. Then came the breakthrough. Surveillance cameras near the crime scene captured a white Hyundai Elantra passing by the house multiple times during the night of the murders. Investigators tracked the vehicle across states until it led them to a suspect, Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old criminology PhD student at Washington State University, just a few miles away from the Idaho campus. The twist was chilling. Kohberger wasn't just any suspect. He was studying criminal justice and criminology, specifically how killers think and act. He had written online surveys asking convicted criminals to describe their emotions and decision-making during crimes. The very man obsessed with understanding murder had now become the prime suspect in one of the most shocking killings in recent years. When police arrested him at his parents' house in Pennsylvania, the community was stunned. How could someone training to become a criminal expert also be accused of being a murderer? Even more disturbing, phone records showed Kohberger's phone had pinged near the victim's house multiple times in the weeks before the murders, suggesting he may have been stalking them. In June 2025, before the trial could begin, Bryan Kohberger pleaded guilty to all 4 murders. On July 23, 2025, he was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years in prison. Along with prison time, he was ordered to pay financial penalties and restitution. Prosecutors called the DNA on the knife sheath the key evidence that sealed the case, and his guilty plea finally ended months of uncertainty for the victims' families. The Idaho College murders remain a grim reminder that evil can hide in plain sight. The students' lives were cut short in the place they felt safest, their own home. And the accused was someone who should have understood crime from an academic lens, not through bloodshed. The tragedy continues to haunt the nation as families and friends of the victims wait for justice to be served. It began on a quiet summer morning in Frederick, Colorado. On August 13, 2018, Shannan Watts, a 34-year-old mother who was 15 weeks pregnant, suddenly vanished along with her 2 young daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. Shannan's friend grew worried when she missed a doctor's appointment and didn't answer her phone. Soon after, police were called to check on the family. The house was empty. Shannan's car was still in the garage. Her purse, keys, and phone were inside. It looked like she had simply disappeared into thin air. At first, everyone hoped for the best, that maybe Shannan had gone to a friend's place or taken the girls on an unplanned trip. But suspicion began to rise almost immediately. Detectives noticed that Shannan's husband, Chris Watts, seemed unusually calm. Instead of panicking, he gave casual interviews on live television, pleading for his wife and children to come back. To outsiders, it looked like the act of a concerned husband. But investigators sensed something was terribly off. Within days, the truth began to unravel. Chris claimed he had no idea where Shannan and the children were, but his story kept changing. When police checked security footage from a neighbor's camera, they noticed Chris backing his truck into the garage early that morning, loading it up with something. It wasn't long before detectives confronted him with the evidence. Under pressure, Chris finally confessed, but the confession came with a chilling twist. He admitted to killing his wife Shannan in their home. But what horrified investigators even more was that he had also taken the lives of his 2 little girls. Instead of showing remorse, Chris coldly explained how he strangled Shannan during an argument, then smothered his daughters. He transported their bodies in his work truck to a remote oil site owned by his company. There, he buried Shannan in a shallow grave and placed his daughters' bodies inside massive oil tanks. The brutality of the crime shocked the world. Chris Watts had seemed like the perfect family man on social media, smiling in photos, playing with his kids, and appearing devoted to his wife. But behind the happy facade was a chilling double life. Investigators later discovered that Chris was having an affair with a co-worker and wanted to start fresh without the burden of his family. Instead of choosing divorce, he chose murder. Even darker was the revelation that Shannan had sensed danger long before. Friends later shared that she had confided in them about Chris growing distant and cold. Yet, no one could have imagined the scale of violence he was capable of. On November 19, 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He avoided the death penalty by confessing and accepting a plea deal. He now spends the rest of his life in prison, locked away as one of the most notorious family annihilators in modern history. The Chris Watts case remains one of the most haunting examples of how appearances can deceive. A man who smiled for the camera, who appeared to love his children, turned out to be their executioner. A loving mother and 2 innocent girls lost their lives not to a stranger, but to the one person who was supposed to protect them above all. A final breath stolen in silence. Bodies discovered where no living soul should be. Fate doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it devours, leaving only unanswered questions. Behind every closed case lies a shadow, and some shadows never die. In early January of 2025, a quiet sense of unease spread through Windsor, Ontario. A young newcomer from Iran, only 26 years old, suddenly stopped appearing at her job, leaving friends, colleagues, and neighbors unsettled. She had last been noticed near the busy stretch of Huron Church Road, just after sundown. At the time, she wore a light brown jacket, dark trousers, and white sneakers, details that would later circulate widely as loved ones pleaded for assistance in locating her. The absence was deeply alarming. She had built a modest but warm routine after moving to Canada, often checking in with family overseas through video calls. Though she confided about loneliness and the difficulties of adjusting to the harsh winter, her co-workers described her as vibrant, hardworking, and full of energy. When she didn't return home that night, concern grew rapidly. Posters went up, searches began, and soon the local community organized a candlelit gathering outside the spa where she had worked, praying for her safe return. Weeks passed, and hope turned into painful uncertainty. The city grew familiar with her photograph, shared widely online and pinned to storefront windows. Those closest to her held on to the idea that she might still walk through the door. But as days turned into months, the silence became heavier. Then, in March, came the grim discovery. Authorities confirmed that her remains had been located. The announcement devastated those who had been following her story. It was not the outcome anyone wanted, and it opened more questions than it answered. Officials stated there was no indication of criminal involvement, but beyond that, details were scarce. The lack of clarity around how she died stirred an uneasy sense of mystery. Was it a tragic accident? An illness? A deliberate decision to end her life? None of those possibilities have been confirmed. An autopsy was reportedly underway, yet no full explanation was offered publicly. This left friends, family, and the broader community in a difficult position, forced to grieve without understanding the circumstances. Her relatives, still in Iran, faced an additional layer of hardship. With no formal diplomatic connection between the two countries, they could not easily travel or manage affairs in person. Their mourning happened at a distance, over phone calls and messages, unable to even attend the vigil that honored her memory. Meanwhile, efforts began to raise funds for the return of her remains to her homeland. Contributions trickled in, reflecting both sorrow and solidarity from strangers who had never met her, but felt the weight of her story. On a September morning in 2023, a teenager from the quiet Alsace village of Champagney set out for what should have been a simple journey. She was expected to reach the small station at Saint-Blaise-la-Roche, where a train would take her to Strasbourg to see her boyfriend. Around 11:15 a.m., she was seen walking along the rural route. A few minutes later, her phone pinged for the last time at 11:22, but she never arrived at the platform. As hours passed with no sign of her, unease quickly spread through the family and the surrounding towns. By nightfall, police and volunteers had launched searches across fields, rivers, and wooded paths. Helicopters circled overhead, canine teams combed the terrain, and divers scoured nearby water. Despite this massive effort, there was no trace of the missing girl. Her photograph began to appear everywhere, on lampposts, shop windows, and online campaigns led by her devastated loved ones. Hundreds of strangers joined the search in the following days, but every lead seemed to collapse into silence. Time stretched on, and the community was left with a void, holding on to hope while fearing the worst. Months slipped away. Investigators chased different possibilities, but failed to secure a breakthrough. Then, almost a year later, a disturbing connection surfaced. A stolen vehicle, a Ford Puma, was linked to a man named Samuel Gonin, a former carpentry teacher with a troubled past. Inside that car, officers discovered a handbag and traces of DNA pointing back to the missing teenager. GPS evidence placed the same car close to where she had last been seen. Gonin's profile unsettled many. A history of violence, psychiatric struggles, and an unstable life. But before he could be fully interrogated, he took his own life in July 2024. His death robbed authorities of answers that might have clarified her fate. 3 months later, in October, the long wait ended in tragedy. Deep in a remote wooded area near Sermoise-sur-Loire, hundreds of kilometers away from where she disappeared, her remains were uncovered. Forensic experts, working with what little was left after more than a year of exposure, concluded that she had likely been strangled, the markings on her neck consistent with the handle of a tote bag. The grim discovery confirmed the fears of those who had been holding vigils for her return, yet it also deepened the mystery. How had she ended up so far from home? Did she cross paths with her suspected killer by chance, or was she targeted? And without the opportunity to question Gonin, these questions may never be fully resolved. The family's anguish was compounded by the unanswered gaps. For them, the year-long uncertainty was followed by the unbearable truth of her death, and still no clear account of her final hours. Late January 2025, an evening began like any other at a group residence in Mesa, Arizona, where a 14-year-old member of the San Carlos Apache tribe lived. That night, she quietly stepped out, clad in a pink and gray top, leaving behind the structure intended to protect her. Around 7:45 p.m., surveillance captured her departing on foot, though officials haven't disclosed exactly where she was seen. Days hum quietly stretch into weeks when family waits without answers. But this time, no message arrived. Her absence went unnoticed until an entire week later. In the days that followed, loved ones learned that she had fled multiple times before, vocalizing her yearning to return to her grandmother's home on the reservation rather than stay inside the institutional walls. It seemed she was yearning for the familiar, the comfort of home cooking, the rhythm of tribal life, and the safety of close kin. Eventually, a grim discovery shattered the fragile hope. On February 14th, hikers stumbled across trash bags off Highway 60, some 80 to 100 miles away from Mesa, where human remains were found. Identification confirmed it was her, and the Pinal County medical examiner ruled the cause: homicidal violence with blunt head trauma. Authorities treated it as intentional harm, yet the perpetrator remains unknown. Her death echoed far beyond that dusty stretch of highway. At a vigil near her former residence, hundreds, clad in red and holding candles, gathered to honor her memory and express grief, intertwined with collective outrage. Signs read, "Justice for Emily Pike," and "No More Stolen Sisters," underscoring the anguish carried by Indigenous communities plagued by higher rates of disappearance and violence. Tribal leaders, lawmakers, and advocates sounded urgent calls for reform. Investigators from the FBI, the Gila County Sheriff's Office, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs joined the hunt for truth. As of now, no arrests have been made, and the case remains open. Meanwhile, rewards totaling over $150,000, offered by both federal agencies and her tribe, seek to encourage anyone with relevant information to come forward. The ripple effect of her death led to meaningful change. Arizona passed a new turquoise alert system, named in her honor, to ensure that when Indigenous individuals under 65 go missing under alarming circumstances, the public is quickly notified. Emily's Law, as it's known, echoes existing early warning systems, but tailored to communities that have historically lacked visibility. This step, officials hope, will ease delays and missteps in protecting vulnerable individuals.